Hello, once again. I don't know if you guys can hear me. We're here for another week. My desk is a mess. So for those of you who are new here, or you're watching the replay, we're here every Sunday, 11:30 to 1:30, approximately. Sometimes it goes a little longer. And you can catch us next time. Abdullah is here. Welcome, welcome. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or concerns. Hope everything is well. The world is a little crazy right now, so hope everybody's doing okay. But I need to put this somewhere. I really need to clean my desk. You guys can't see it, but I need to clean my desk. Okay, put this here. That should be fine. So first I have to actually answer a comment again from Stupidity Delivery Service, which is good. I want to answer it here in the live because it's going to help you guys as well. Comments. Okay, where is this? Got a lot of comments this week. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to address is a comment from Stupidity Delivery Service recently. Comment on the last live. And we've been talking a bit about like the intonation, vowel length, stress, and all these things, and clearing up some misunderstandings and some things that maybe you were taught wrong. So in fact, I should probably make this a whole little series in itself, answering all this because it's all connected. But so this person says, first of all, there are some small details which made me stick to the idea of vowel lengths and believe it is something real for so long. So for those of you who don't know, based on what I've talked about before, vowel length is objectively a real thing, but within American English, say between like E and I, the long E and the short I don't use those terms. They're misleading, they're confusing, they are inaccurate within the context of American English. So I in kit and kid is the same length. There's no difference there. It's an illusion based on the voiced or voicelessness of the last sound. E is not longer than I. It depends on the stress. That's how English works. So that being said, or I could also say I and sit, and then I and it, which it is normally not stressed. That I is going to be relatively shorter than the I and sit because sit is stressed, it is not. That's where the vowel length comes from in English. So going on from that, this person says, so there's the S sound and the Z sound. So if I say the word, this person says, so if I say the word knees, it's going to sound as something like knees in IPA with a real long extended E and a brief Z. And if I compare this to the word niece, then the last word sounds like niece with a short E sound and a considerably longer S. That's what this person is saying. Okay. This is not true. This is right away not accurate. Okay. Further, this person says, if I were to explain it to myself without stepping away from the every stressed syllable is about the same length idea, every stressed syllable is about the same length, relatively, minus the focus word. The focus word can be considerably longer, depending. But this person says, without stepping away from the idea of every stressed syllable is about the same length, I would say something like the words knees and niece are still equal in length. The only difference is that in niece, the S takes more time. That would be taken by the E. So in one case, this person is saying that the knees and niece is the same length because they're both stressed, but the E is longer in knees, and then the S is longer in niece. This is completely untrue, completely inaccurate. Further, this person says, but these two words are still of equal length, and none of them is distinguished by natives as relying on the length of the word itself. So that part is true. Yes, we do not rely on the length of the word to know the difference between the word. If I say the word knees, all right, and I'll type this here. If I say the word knees, I see stupidity delivery services here. I'm answering your question. So we have knees, which is pronounced like knees. And then we have niece, I can spell niece, right? Which is pronounced like niece. That's high random characters. I'll get to Abdullah's question in a second. Welcome, David. Yes. Okay. The only difference between these two is that one uses a Z sound and one uses an S sound. That's it. The S isn't longer than the Z. The E in the first word isn't longer than the one in the second word. This is part of, I briefly mentioned this, right? So say kit versus kid. I think this is a common example people use. Your example is basically pointing to this, where it's the idea that the vowel sound in the first one, which has a voiceless consonant at the end, that vowel sound is shorter, even though it's stressed, compared to the one in the second word, which ends in a stress or in a voiced sound. This is not true. This is not true. This is an illusion. Okay, it's an illusion. What's happening here, the in kid with a D. So I say the K, or release the K, I go into I. So I'm saying I, I'm going up into closing the D. Id. Okay. The voice continues the entire time. There's no point where the voice cuts off. I, all vowels are voiced, so I is voiced. And that voice continues until we close into the D. And then we can, hold the D, we can push out the D, whatever, but we need that voice to signal that it's a D, not a T. Okay. That can create the illusion that compared to kit with a T at the end, that vowel is shorter, but it's actually not shorter. In some way, you could maybe say that it's kind of shorter, but it's not in a way that is significant or meaningful in any way. So if I say kit, okay, kid. See, I have to start dropping my voice as I get closer and closer to that T sound. And all you're hearing is the transition. Okay. There's different ways that you can split hairs and look at this, but the length of the vowel is the same. I'm still taking the same amount of time to go from I to D or I to T. It's the same end position. T and D are in the same place. It takes the same amount of time to get to them. It's just that when I go into the T, I have to drop the voice before I get to the T. Okay. With D, I need to hold the voice through the D. And that's what creates the illusion. Now, you're also saying, in addition to that, that the S itself is longer. So in this case, it's a little bit different than, say, kit and kid, because T and D are stop sounds, right? Where S and Z, you can actually hold them. So you're saying that the E in niece is shorter, which I would say is it seems shorter because of the illusion of the fact that the S is voiceless. So you have to drop the voice of E to go into the S, where with the Z, you don't have to drop that voice. Okay, so it seems a little shorter for the vowel, but it's not. And then as for the Z and the S part, knees. So if I say both of these, I'm going to say them side by side, fully enunciated, clearly, okay, equally. Niece, knees, niece, knees. Okay, so ignoring the vowel part, because we already talked about why that seems to be shorter, but it's not. The S and the Z are the same length. Okay, they're the same length. Now, in reality, let's say if I say, "Oh, I hit my knees. I hit my knees. I hit my knees." Well, this is going to go in a bad direction if I say hit my knees. Uh, I guess I say I fell on. That sounds a little less uh, abusive. So I fell on my knees. I fell on my knees. I fell on my knees. 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 I fell on my niece. I fell on my niece. The S, because of this is partially due to the nature of the S sound, because it has a bit of like a sharpness and a whistle to it. It really kind of sticks out, right? Where the Z, when we add that voice, even though it's in the same position, it's the same shape, everything's the same, we just add the voice. That voice sort of dulls that sharpness a little bit, and it can make it seem kind of a little, I don't want to say shorter, but smaller in a way. Um, I guess so, yeah. But I didn't want to say I hit my niece. That sounds, to me, that sounds more offensive because you can accidentally fall on somebody. I guess you can accidentally hit somebody too, and that's not the point. The point I'm trying to give you two sentences that are the same, except we're changing this one word. Um, so the other thing with knees, right? We have that partial end of word devoicing that can happen, and so what you could hear is, remember, it's partial. If you make knees into a straight S, just full end of word devoicing, which doesn't exist, then it would sound exactly like the word niece, and now you're actually changing the meaning of the word. Okay, that is something that natives would distinguish as the difference. But if you use partial end of word devoicing, which we do very commonly, you have to start in the Z, and then you can drop the voice into the S and actually end it on an S sound. So it's actually kind of more like, or to kind of try to write it phonetically, it would be kind of something like this in a way. I would make the Z like a small Z, but I can't do that in the chat here. So it's kind of like this, with a little tiny Z and then ends in an S. So my knees, 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 knees. Now, because of this, this is another reason why I notice, because we're not dropping the voice of the E until we hit the Z, and then the Z has that little bit of voice before we drop into the the voice into the S. That makes the vowel still seem longer compared to a straight S, like in the word niece. That's the best I can think for why it might be perceived that way, between the S and the Z. But for sure, I know for a fact that the E, like this IPA thing where it's like you have the IPA symbol and then you have the dot dot to make it longer. I'm always confused when I see that in English. Like maybe if you're comparing like sit and it, where it is not stressed, if you put the dot dot on the I in sit because it's stressed and that makes it relatively longer than it, that would make sense to me. But whenever I see that dot, those two dots usually transcribed for English, it just confuses me and it doesn't make any sense, because it's not how English works. So, okay. And one other thing I want to offer here, I mentioned this once before somewhere. You'll see some people talk about, like, they'll give demonstrations. They'll show how, like, oh, okay, so they're gonna, like, they actually time it, right? They'll say the word, and they'll actually have like a little timer running, and it'll say like, okay, it took, like 1 second to say this word, with, say, between like kit and kid, right? Say, okay, it took 1 second to say the vowel in kit, or to say the whole word kit. But it took 1.3 seconds to say kid or whatever, something like that, right? But what I've noticed, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I really don't think so, it wouldn't make any sense, but one thing that I noticed in a video from Sounds American, the Sounds American channel, only because somebody asked me about it. One of my students was like, hey, this guy is saying that there's a different length here, is that true? So I watched the comparison that he did, and he actually had a little timer under each one when he said it. But if you listen closely, and this is something as an English learner you might not notice, which is a little infuriating to me because this is the job of the teacher, not the learner, because you might not actually hear the intonation difference. It's very, very difficult for us to, if we're comparing, there's a sort of a comparison intonation, right? Where we'll say kit, kid, kit, kid, kit, kid, this, that, this, that, this, that. Okay. Now, in reality, this and that are the same length, but because I'm comparing them directly together, I'm actually shifting the intonation, and that's changing the actual length of the sound. I'm actually creating a slightly different length on the second one, with that intonation change, because that's part of how we show comparison in English, usually. So when I watched the example on the Sounds American channel that I saw of him, I don't know if it was kit and kid, but it was something like that. I could hear immediately that he was using that comparison intonation, and he was actually artificially lengthening the second word. And I don't know, I don't want to say I don't know how he didn't notice that, but as I said, it's very hard for us not to do that. Even like we have to really try and say them neutrally, objectively the same length like they're supposed to be, instead of bringing in this contrast sort of intonation and lengthening difference, because it's a natural part of the language. And so I imagine that when he was saying that example, he just didn't realize that that's what he was doing. So I don't want to put it on him and say, oh, bad job for you. But that is part of why what I would explain when people say like, oh, the one with the voiced sound at the end, the vowel is longer or the word is longer. It's not. It's part of the illusion. And this comparison intonation just creates more of that illusion. Okay, so number 2, Stupidity Delivery Service also said, whether the answer is yes or no to everything I just talked about, is this all anyhow related with the idea of fortis and lenis consonants? Are there any other cases of reducing the length of a vowel and increasing the length of a consonant in normal speech, not emotional speech? Okay, the length of a consonant is the length of a consonant. The way that now, so you say like aside from like emotional speech, right? So yes, there are ways that we can sort of hold out a sound. So if I say like, that is a good idea, right? I'm really holding that TH. That's a special effect. There's a special reason. The TH sound normally is not that long, right? So if we ignore any special cases, we're talking about just like within the language, right? Just normal functioning language without any special cases, just the way sounds would generally be in their normal state. However long it takes a consonant to be pronounced is however long it takes a consonant to pronounce. That has nothing to do with the word. It has nothing to do with the vowels around it. Well, I guess I can't necessarily say that completely, but it is what it is. So if there's an S sound, it's an S sound. S, s, okay. Now there is a dynamic range, right, where every sound has sort of a lazier, weaker form. So if I say, I don't know, I think a good example here. If I say so, okay, now there's a special reason why I'm doing that. But if I say, right, it's very long, it's very clear. Or if I'm just speaking quickly, I say, okay, blah, 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 blah. So. Okay, both on the vowel and the consonant there. It's the whole word that gets affected. And it's based primarily around the vowel, but some sounds like the S you can hold out. T's and D's you can't really hold out like that. And so you won't be able to lengthen them in that way. But because some sounds can be actually held, it is possible to lengthen them for a special effect. But if you don't have a special effect, or you don't have a reason to like super clearly enunciate them versus saying them faster and more lazily, there's nothing about the language that I'm aware of that causes, say, an S in this case to be longer or shorter than an S in that case. S is just an S. Okay. So I would just completely ignore that idea as a whole. Most of the changes that happen anyway are going to be based around the vowel itself. Okay. Notice I just said most. Might be a little bit longer on that M there. But if I say most, that O, right? Most, okay? The vowel, because the vowel is the center of the syllable, it's the nucleus of the syllable, that is what is going to tend to get affected the most by the stress effect of either being louder, longer, or shorter or quieter. The consonants are just kind of there. Now you can speak more quickly and make everything, whether it's stressed or not, right? Speaking quickly means you spend less time on every sound and every syllable overall. And so everything gets sort of condensed. We still need the relative stress and unstress, of course, but everything gets condensed. So if I'm speaking really quick like this, obviously all the consonants are going to be shorter, all the vowels are going to be shorter relative to how they would normally be in normal speech. And if I speak really slowly and clearly like this, then all the sounds get a little bit longer and a little bit louder, even whether they're stressed or unstressed, because I'm speaking clearly, right? That's the dynamic range. But if we limit it to, say, just the flow of normal speech, or just enunciated speech, or just fast speech within each of those domains, the vowel is the thing that gets most of the effect of lengthening. So you can see how it's relative. Hopefully that makes sense. Number 3, also this person says, I know that sometimes natives lengthen fricatives like s, z, and th, s, z, and th, and so on. And these fricatives take the length of the lax vowels without doing so to the tense vowels. I'm not so sure about that. For example, we say the word live as a long L and a brief I, and the word leave as a long extended E and a brief normal L. No, this is absolutely wrong. Absolutely 100% wrong. But we do so only in very emotional, exaggerated speech. Okay, so if I say, let's say, I need to live. Okay, there's a long L there. Yeah, okay. Now this vowel sound in there is I, right? Live. Okay. Now if I say, I need to leave, I need to live, I need to leave. Not really much difference between the length of the L or the length of the vowel there. So no, that is complete nonsense. Again, going back to what I was just saying, it tends to be the vowel that gets most of the changes with like lengthening and things like that. There are cases like you say here where maybe you can like hold an L or hold an S or hold or whatever, because of the nature of the sound. It allows you to hold it on like a stop sound, but that is purely for effect. It has nothing to do with the difference between, say, live and leave, like with the vowels or the L's in those words. And an extremely important question: do natives anyhow distinguish unreleased T and D by the length of the previous vowel? No, we do not. At least I don't think so. Maybe that could be part of it in a way. It's not about the length of it, but what I was saying, where how like we drop the voice as we go into the T, or we keep the voices going into the D, that could very likely be part of it. It's the length of the vowel isn't different. We're just dropping the voice as we transition before we hit the T. But the I is still there. It's the length of how long it takes to get to the T or the D is the same. I understand we've already been through this, but I've heard a lot of authoritative, quote unquote, information about this one. So I have to make it perfectly clear. If I say the words hat and had without releasing the T or D at the end, do I have to shorten the ah sound before the T a little and lengthen the ah sound before the D slightly to make it all more understandable? No, absolutely not. Hat, had, hat, had, had, had. Do you have a hat? Do you have a hat? I'll change it to had, even though it's not grammatically correct. But do you have a hat? Do you have a had? Do you have a hat? Do you have a had? No difference there. Okay. What allows us to distinguish the difference is that by the time you get into that T or D position, in this case it's a T or D, it could be PB or KG, but by the time you get into that position, the voice needs to be gone. Okay. And it's a really quick transition. It's not like we're saying like right? It's okay. So the actual, like, you could say maybe microscopically the vowel is technically shortening when that voice drops, but it's really in that little tiny window there. Okay, same thing with it, kit, and kid. It's that little tiny window there that we switch off that voice. It does sort of gradually fall a little bit, but it doesn't end until we're either right about to close into it or we are closed into it. And say, especially with the mechanics of stopping. So in order for you to understand that it's a stopped D, okay, because if I go into this position and I stop, it's going to be a T or a D. It's going to be interpreted that way because of where I'm stopping, where I'm putting my tongue. But when I do that sort of hard cutoff, more like glottal type stop, if I'm in that position, the only real way to tell that it's a D is if the voice continues through the stopping, right? So ha. Now I'm trying to exaggerate and make it a little clearer, but you can hear that. Where if I go into the T, now I'm still pushing air, but you don't hear anything because I'm not adding any voice to sort of get caught there, right? Had, 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 had. Okay, that is the biggest difference between the two. It's not the vowel length. It has nothing to do with the vowel. It has to do with, does that voice continue through the hold, even though we're not pushing it out? Or does it just suddenly seem to cut off when we're in that position? If it cuts off when we're in that position, it's a T because it's voiceless. There's nothing there. It's different than, say, ha with nothing after it, because I would just gradually fall. Ha, ha. There's no cutoff. Okay. That's how we distinguish the difference between them. Do not change the vowel length. If you try to say like hat and had, you're going to mess up the language. Your pronunciation is going to be weird. Like even for me as a native, just trying to give you an example of that, like it feels like I'm trying to avoid the sound, and it doesn't feel good in my mouth. It's like I'm trying to say the word without saying the word by changing the vowel like that. Okay, if yes, then how does it apply to we don't rely on length to distinguish sound? So everything I just described. If no, then how do we make the unreleased hat and had distinguishable? I just described that. I know we place T a glottal stop and don't use it for D. We do use glottal stop for D. Are they always distinguishable this way? Are they distinguishable at all? 90% of the time, at least. Now, it is possible that sometimes things don't come out clearly. That can always happen with communication, but I would probably say 95 to 99% of the time, there's not a problem. Plus, a lot of the time, right, there's going to be something after it, right? So if I say, do you want a hat? Obviously, that's the last word. But if I say, put your hat on, and now it turns into a flap D because it's connected to a vowel. It's, even though now it's a D sound, it's a flap D. And obviously, I'm saying put your hat on. It's not going to be the word had. So we have the context as well. So context is also a way that we tell the difference. But linking rules and things like that as well. Because I guess, yeah, the T and the D would both turn into a flat D when they link. So it's really the context in that case that we would know the difference. And lastly, by the way, I learned to hear the difference between E and I. All it took was to stop trying to recognize them by a different length. Yes, 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 because they are not a different length. Okay, so I see Wendell has a bunch of questions. Now that I got that out of the way, I know that was a big thing. But it was very, very important. I really wanted to dive into that and make that clear. I don't know if Stupidity Delivery Service or anybody else has questions related to everything I just explained about vowel length and the, voice versus voiceless consonant after the vowel and blah, 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 all that stuff. Let me know, and we can dive more into that, particularly Stupidity Delivery Service. If there's anything in there that is confusing, you're not sure about, blah, 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 let me know. And I like that you mentioned authoritative sources. I like how you put it in quotation marks. But yeah, that's another thing, again, that it doesn't make sense to me. It's really, really confusing. And again, I think the source of the problem might be that there are some things that may be linguistically like meta, right? Not dependent on a specific language, that may in some sense be meta objectively true, but based on the way that a particular language implements things, like say how the stress works in American English, that can make that objective thing like vowel length. Vowel length is an actual thing. It does exist, right? Technically speaking, we could say that E is longer than I. But within American English and how the stress system of American English works, it sort of cancels that out and makes it not important. And it just causes confusion for you because, like, as you said, you were listening for the difference in length between E and I. And once you stopped doing that, you started to be able to hear the difference better. Okay. Because your brain was looking for something that doesn't really exist in this language. Okay. So I do think this is another reason why I think that not just in English teaching, not just in language learning, but in all skills, programming, art, whatever, all skills. There's or music. Music is a really big one that's kind of problematic. There's the theory, and then there's the reality, right? And I'm not saying that the theory is necessarily wrong, but theory doesn't always match practice. Theory is an attempt to sort of describe and analyze, kind of like the grammar, right? When you study English grammar, you're studying a description of the language. You're not studying, if you study English grammar, you're not studying English. You're studying a description of how English works, from not from a pronunciation level, but from a grammatical level. And there are plenty of things that are true there, right? Subject, right? English is a subject verb object language. So we have a subject, a verb, and then an object. Japanese is a subject object verb language. So they say, I to the beach go, where in English we say, I go to the beach. That's true, right? That piece of theory is accurate for describing English grammar. But then you learn, certain grammar rules and stuff that nobody uses, like, oh, you should never put a preposition at the end. People put prepositions at the end all the time. That's an old grammar rule that doesn't really exist anymore. And it really wasn't ever actually a grammar rule. It's some stupid guy who thought Latin was better than English came along, and he had a lot of big influence. And English used to put prepositions at the end, and now we put prepositions at the end again. But that's something that's kind of changed, but the description doesn't always match the reality. The description tells you maybe how it should be according to whatever source, or what might technically be relatively true, but maybe it doesn't actually matter that much in reality, right? So you don't want to get caught in theory. That's one of the single biggest problems with skill development education. If you go and you're learning history, it's facts, right? This happened on this date. This person did that. You take a test, you get all the answers right. It's knowledge. Skill is not knowledge. Skill and knowledge are connected, yes, but skill is not knowledge, okay? And one of the single biggest problems in teaching when it comes to skills is too much reliance on knowledge and theory, not enough of actual practical application of skill, and listening for how things, in this case, listening, because we're talking about pronunciation language, actually listening for the reality instead of what the theory says should happen. Okay. Anyway, that's my little rant on that. Okay, Abdullah, sorry. I know you asked this question a while ago. How to differentiate between it was and it wasn't. It has to do with stress. Okay. Yeah, so it was and are all not stressed. Now you can, in order to make it a little bit clearer, because we have 3 unstressed syllables in a row, you could give a little bit of a bump to was. And in isolation, that's probably what we would do, because we like to kind of do this. So if I say it wasn't, but that's not a complete sentence. So if I say it was an animal, okay, it was an animal. It was an animal. It was an animal. So we're probably going to drop the T in it first, which I guess we could do that in it wasn't also. So that doesn't really matter. But it wasn't, or it wasn't, it wasn't, it wasn't, it wasn't. Notice that N at the end of an. It wasn't. So I don't have to say I don't even have to say un. I can go straight from Z to N. Zn, zn, okay. But the N doesn't cut off. Okay. Now, obviously, if I say the T and wasn't, which we might do sometimes, usually we don't, that would make a clear difference. Usually we're probably going to stop that T, right? It wasn't, it wasn't, it wasn't. Okay. Now, in wasn't, the was does get stressed only because the not is stressed, but when we contract it, right, we literally removed the vowel out of it, and so we can't just stress nt. And so the stress transfers to was. Same thing with the didn't or don't, right? Do not. The not goes into don't and makes it stress. Anyway, so there is stress there, you're correct. Where there isn't really stress in was in the first case. And that will make a little bit of a difference, but the biggest difference is actually that cutoff at the end, right? In fact, even if I don't add anything after an, just listen to these side by side. It wasn't. It wasn't. I'm even going to put a little bit of clarity on the was. It wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. Verse. It wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. See, you can hear that. It's closing. Natives will hear that. They'll hear that stop. Okay. Now, obviously, if we put something after it, it was an animal. An animal was. You still go Z to N. Was an animal. Obviously, that N feels like it sounds like it's linking. Feels like it's linking over. If I say it wasn't, even if I just say animal, even though it's not grammatically correct anymore, it wasn't animal. It wasn't animal. It wasn't animal. Okay, that stop is going to prevent the N from connecting. Now we do have the NT plus vowel rule. It was an animal. It was an animal. It was an animal. Now they're exactly the same, provided that I put a little bit of stress on the was in the first case. And now we're relying on context. Okay, so if you don't have that stop, you use the NT plus vowel rule to connect over to a vowel. Then it's context. So sometimes the pronunciation, because of how it can work and things that can apply, like the NT plus vowel rule, sometimes that makes it to where from a pure pronunciation perspective, it's just not clear, right? Even if the sounds themselves are clear, the words themselves are clear, but because of a particular linking rule or something that you're using, it actually will sound exactly the same as something else, and we rely on the context. There are cases like that, and this potentially could be a case. Okay. Wendell with all the questions. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. 2 week questions. 2 weeks. That's going to be a lot. Okay. Can people in English use kind of movie or types of movie referring to a title? I'm not sure what you mean. You're going to have to clarify that, because the phrase kind of movie or types of movie, those are fine, but referring to a title, I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you can elaborate. Does get in the sentence, I get in the office, functioning as phrasal verb before stressing the particle in? Function. I get in the office. It's actually not the most natural thing to say. It does work. It's fine. Depends on how we're thinking about it. More likely we say get to the office, unless you're literally talking about get inside the office. But I would define this as a phrasal verb, yes. Remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what's a phrasal verb and what's not. It's what is the feeling and the logic of the preposition, and why does it create that meaning in a particular context, either in combination with something else or without combination, in combination with something else. So that's the main point. But I would define this as a phrasal verb, yes. Get in the office. Well, yeah, I can think of 2 contexts where that would work. In one case, I would think of it, it feels kind of like a phrasal verb. In the other case, it doesn't. Because my definition of phrasal verb is it's a combination where it actually has like a change in meaning. And the exact way that we use it in the context can determine if we're actually changing the meaning. But get is, most things with get are going to be phrasal verbs anyway, because of how get is. It's already replacing other verbs and then being used with prepositions that verb may not be used with anyway. So yeah, as I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much if it's an actually a phrasal verb or not. But hi, do people skip the K in words like asks and ghosts? Okay, well, there's no K in ghosts. There's a G, a G sound. I think you mean like the T between the STS there. Yeah, so I've talked about this before. If you have a K, a P, or a T between two S's, what we're most likely going to do, you can enunciate, okay, asks, ghosts, it's fine. But what's most likely going to happen is we're going to be in the S position. We're going to partially move into that consonant sound, the P, the K, or the T, while holding the S. Okay, so if it's SKS, so the S stays there, but the back of the tongue can sort of come up towards the K without actually closing. Okay, that's like a weak K or a half K, you can think of it. If it's a T, ghosts, ghosts. So I'm S, I'm making this little sort of change that would close into a T, but I'm not actually closing it, and then just going right back into that S. And the because it's not closing, the S gets to flow the whole time, even though I'm technically moving this a little. Ghosts, ghosts. Okay, and then if it's P, like wasps, right? Wasps, wasps. That's all you have to do. You hold the S and just without closing the lips completely. That creates the illusion of the P. So do people skip it? No. But we do modify it usually. If you completely skip it, let's see, does that work? Yes. In a word like asks, you can do that by lengthening the S. We still probably want to create some sort of little change in maybe the airflow, like asks. So we can notice that there's some little change. If I just say he asks, it's possible. It's not clear, but it does exist. If we say ghosts, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts. Possible, yes. But again, we're probably going to make just some sort of little tiny change, maybe with the breath. Ghosts, ghosts. So there, I'm not actually changing my tongue. Ghosts, ghosts. I'm sort of dropping the voice really quick, pushing it back out. Ghosts, ghosts. So there's more than one way to do it. Technically, you don't have to do anything, but it starts to get a little unclear. I think I would say it's not the most common thing to do. We're probably going to have at least a little bit of motion or a change with the flow of breath to show that there's something there, even though we don't actually fully pronounce the sound in between. And that's what I would recommend that you do instead of completely dropping it. You'll still sound perfectly very natural and normal if you don't drop it. But I recommend that you try to use those half versions because to me, that's the perfect blend between like clear and natural sounding. You get sort of the best of both worlds. This pen doesn't work right, or this pen doesn't work well. Both are perfectly fine. Do Americans leave out the auxiliary verb do, as in the sentence you like tea, or even like tea? Okay, so this is an informal thing. It is only used informally. Yes, it does exist perfectly fine. You can drop the auxiliary verb. Now, if you say like tea, that sounds even more informal. It starts to sound almost kind of like you're on the edge of breaking the language a bit. It does exist. It can sound a little rude because since you're not even taking the time to mention the subject in this case, you're dropping two words. It can sound like really, really direct because you're just being like really short. Like you're just like tea. And of course your tone doesn't have to be negative, but it feels like you're shortening it because you don't want to talk to that person, kind of, right? So it can sound very, very informal, very, very direct. That's sort of how I would describe it. does exist, I would recommend you can drop the do, and we do that all the time informally. Yeah. You like tea? You like dogs? You want to go to the beach? Okay. It's still a regular yes or no question. You're not making a statement into a question, which is something else. There's a special reason why we can do that. It's just we're dropping the do informally, and the context is clear. It's just a regular yes or no question. To do it with stressed or strong to and focused on intentional intonation, attentional, not intentional, attentional. Because I'm talking about the attention where your focus is going. All intonation is intentional. Versus to do it with following intonation or exclamation or commanded with a weak to. Okay, what's the question? With a stressed or strong to. So if you say like to do it versus like to do it versus to do it, you would need a very special case to do the first one. Again, I've mentioned this many, many times. You need a very special case within the right context to stress to. Okay. Now notice what I just did there. I said to stress to. Now I was speaking a little slowly. I was enunciating a little bit. I did not stress to there. I just fully pronounced it. Remember, there's a difference there. Just because we don't reduce it doesn't mean we're stressing it. But to actually stress to and say like to do it, you need a very special context, very special purpose there. Normally it's going to be to do it, to do it, to do it. Now that wouldn't necessarily be command intonation because the grammar. If it's command, there's no to, right? It would just be do it, do it. You know. But if you say like I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. Okay, that could be like an exclamation maybe. In to like it with strong version of to, an exclamatory no statement, right? Rising. You spelled it with a C. It's spelled with an S, but it's a Z sound. So it tells me you might have a little bit of ear issues there. Rising, maybe it's just a typo. Following intonation. Rising and falling. So like rising on to and falling on like. What? That's not really clear. Like to like it, something kind of like that. I don't know. Again, it doesn't matter what the intonation pattern is. That has nothing to do with to. Okay, you keep asking a lot of these questions. I don't know if maybe like you're noticing things or if you're just curious or what, but you keep asking a lot of questions related to like making to strong, and I have no idea why, because 99% of the time, well, 99.9% of the time, to is to for one. So it's reduced. It's definitely not stressed. But 99% of the time, whether we say to or to, it's not stressed. It just might be reduced or not reduced. So almost any question you ask me about making to stressed or strong, almost any question you ask me, regardless of the intonation, the context, whatever, the answer is going to be no, you cannot stress to. Just because of how to works, the nature of it, there's not many reasons to actually give it a focus. So that should take care of most to questions you have. But I'm not completely sure what your question is here. When we're talking about rising, is it like rising on to, falling on like, or is it like rising on to and like, and then falling on it? I don't know. I'm going to be talking about rising and falling soon in the intonation series, because there's the falling, the rising, and there's rise, fall, fall, rise. We're going to be talking about all that. And then the three types of intonations are present. I don't know what you mean by present. You mean like present tense? It has nothing to do with tenses. How could intonation be in the sentence? Do you have the USB to VGA adapter? Should do and you be emphatic or used for emphasis? That is 100% dependent on the context. Intonation. I was thinking about this yesterday. There's a piece of information in the masterclass when I was originally arranging all all my massive amount of notes. There's a part where I talk about purpose and context, and I decided to save that for the attentional intonation because it's the strongest there. But yesterday I was kind of thinking I probably should have included that at the start of the following part 1. So, hindsight is 2020, as we say. But that's okay. I'm going to be, I might include it actually at the beginning of the rising intonation, which was supposed to be done yesterday. I had a family emergency. Don't worry, everything's fine. But I lost a lot of the time that I was going to work on the video. So don't worry, it's still coming. Context. Purpose and context, right? There's a purpose to what you're saying. You always have a purpose. If you say I'm hungry, it's to communicate that you need food, right? Anything you say has a purpose. Otherwise, you wouldn't say it, right? And then everything that you say is in a context, right? You're always in a situation. When we talk about language, we're like, oh, here's a situation, or here's a random sentence in isolation. It's like, okay, that's fine in a limited scope for sort of, seeing maybe how some things work or giving some examples of things. But in real life, you're always in a context. Otherwise, you wouldn't exist, right? Existence is a context. So right now, my context is I'm talking to you. I know you're an English learner, which means subconsciously I'm enunciating a little bit more than I normally would. I'm aware of that because I notice that when sometimes I notice it when I'm speaking to you guys. Usually more often I notice it when I'm editing my videos. I'm speaking more or less normally. I know that for sure, but I am enunciating a little bit more, especially here and there to make things a little clearer. But what was my point of that? I lost my thought. Oh yeah, so that's my context, right? Based on that context, it affects the way that I speak, right? Knowing that I'm talking to English learners, even if it's just a little small subconscious effect, that's the context that my brain knows I'm in, and it's going to affect in some little way the way that I'm speaking. Or a context could be simple as a topic, dogs. Oh yeah, dogs are great. I like dogs, right? So you're talking about dogs. That provides the context, right? So it could be a situation, it could be a topic, whatever it is, but there's always a context, okay? Intonation is rooted in purpose and context, Now, the reason why I decided originally to put that idea into attentional intonation is because attentional intonation is where we actually shift the default focus based on the purpose and the context. So structural intonation, obviously, there's still purpose and context to what you're saying, but the more that I've sort of gone through and I've made these lessons, I started to realize, yeah, because you say when we talk about like falling intonation, a regular statement, okay? And I talked about this in the lesson, right? You can rise on a regular statement. It has to be in response to something. It does make it a yes or no question for confirmation, but it's not a normal yes or no question, right? You can't just replace it with a normal yes or no question. So it has a special purpose, but you can rise at the end of a statement, even though we don't normally do that if you have the right purpose and context, okay? Whether it normally ends in a fall or it normally ends in a rise, it's always possible to use the opposite for a special effect. That's how the internal engine works. And you're going to see more of that in the rising lesson, part 1 and part 2, that part 1 is going to be coming out very soon. But especially in part 2, we're going to look at cases where WH questions rise and why they rise. Okay. Actually, I guess I didn't talk about that yet, but yeah. Anyway, point is that they're structurally, right? It's called structural for a reason because it's the default based on, is it a statement, is it a yes no question, is it whatever, and so usually it'll either fall or it'll rise depending on what it is. But with the right purpose and context, you can always flip it. Okay, now you can't just randomly choose. You have to work within the parameters of the language, of course. You can't just randomly choose to do whatever you want necessarily, but it's always possible to switch things around. So when you ask me how could intonation be in the sentence, there's a million ways that intonation could be in the sentence, especially if we bring in emotional intonation. If I can say, do you have the USB to VGA adapter? Sounds like I'm kind of maybe a little angry. I'm kind of annoyed. Like, hey, like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. Or, you're not helping me very well or something. And I'm just kind of like, hey, do you have this? Like, I need it. Okay. Or I could say, hey, do you have the USB to VGA adapter? Okay. Sounds kind of lighter. Okay. It sounds more like just regular question, not too much emotional color in there. Now you're specifically asking about the do and the you. Should they be emphatic or used for emphasis, strong forms of the verb to have? If you have the right context. Okay. Now, normally, right, do you have the USB to VGA adapter? Now, if I say, do you have the USB to VGA adapter? So I'm asking you specifically because I don't have it, or maybe he doesn't have it. I want to know, do you have it? Because nobody else has it. So I want to know you specifically, do you have it? Because I don't know where it is. Okay. Now you wouldn't just normally ask it that way. The normal question is perfectly fine. You don't have to point out you. But if you have the right context, like say, you ask me, hey, do you have this adapter? I say, like, maybe I thought you had it. I say, no, do you have it? Okay, so I'm sort of pointing it back at you and like, well, I thought you had it, right? It's sort of implied in that context. Or maybe there's like several people. I say, do you have the adapter? No. Do you have the adapter? No. Do you have the adapter? Okay, because it's like, well, it's not this person. It's not this person. Is it this person? So, as I did the same thing. Do you have it? Is it this person? Okay, special context, special case there. If you say do and you make that stressed, do you have the USB to VGA adapter? Notice we stay high on that, right? Because we're putting the focus word on do. Do you have the USB to VGA adapter? That is a different context, a different purpose. Okay, because remember, we're moving the attentional intonation. When you move the attentional intonation, we're doing that for a reason. In this case, it's not about you specifically, but I think you have it, right? Obviously, that is you specifically, but I'm not focusing on you as compared to me or someone else. So, like, I think you have it. I assume you have it, and then you seem to be implying maybe that you don't have it because like maybe it's important and you don't want me to be mad, and so you're not saying, oh, I don't have it. And I'm like, okay, wait, do you have the USB to VGA adapter? Because I thought you did. I'm pretty sure you do, but do you? Okay, that might be when we would emphasize that. Context, and this is also, that's attentional intonation more than structural intonation. So hopefully that starts to be a little clear of why I defined different types of intonation. Because if we don't have, say, structural and attentional, and I'm just talking about this very vaguely and generally, things can get kind of a little confusing and stuff. But oh, this is attentional intonation. I'm shifting the attention. I'm shifting the focus, right? The focus word. So it makes sense. I need a special context to do that. Where the structural intonation itself, usually we're probably just going to rise at the end of this. Or if we start from do, it's going to stay high because we're shifting it to do. And that's part of how the rising intonation works. So you can see how the structural and the attentional interact together, but they're two separate things that make it easier to understand, I hope. Okay, why changing of intonation pattern in this sentence with the word are and you? How are you versus how are you? Any change in meaning? Yeah, this is a very normal thing. So normally to be is not stressed. Because to be is it's just existence, right? Like it's just I am a teacher. I'm a teacher, right? It usually gets contracted, whatever. But there are some cases, some contexts, like when we say, how are you? The purpose of the sentence and the focus of the sentence is I'm asking you about your state of being. Okay, so normally to be is just an equal sign. I equals teacher. That's all it is. So it doesn't need to get stressed, doesn't need to get focus or anything like that. It's just there. It usually gets contracted. When I say, how are you? I want to know your existence, positive, negative, things going good, things not going good, right? That's the purpose. And so are or to be would naturally get that stress in that question. Okay, how are you? How are you? It gets the focus. Now, if you put it on you, that sounds like you're passing it back. Okay, which, by the way, we're going to talk about more cases of pass back intonation built into the language. It's more than just what I talked about in the following lessons. There's actually quite a bit more in the rising lessons. It's actually where things start getting really interesting and mind-blowing, to me at least. This is more of like, it's not a structural pass back. It's sort of a contextual grammatical pass back in a way, which you don't have to worry. You don't have to be too technical about that. But what I mean by pass back here is, if like, you wouldn't come up to somebody and say, how are you? It actually sounds kind of, it depends on exactly the way you say it and the particular context that your situation you're in with that person. But that, if you start it with you and you just go up to somebody, how are you? It can sound maybe like really, really direct. It can sound like just out of nowhere. Like I'm just coming up to a random person, or maybe I know you. I just say, how are you? How are you? How are you? It's kind of weird because we don't expect that. We expect, how are you? Okay. Now, if I ask you, how are you? You say, oh, I'm good. How are you? Okay. Now it's very natural to put it on the you, because I asked about your state of existence. Are you doing well or not? And then if you repeat it, right? How are you? Oh, I'm good. How are you? It doesn't feel right. If you use that same exact way that I said it, it sounds like you're just mimicking me, right? Where if you shift it to you, how are you? Now it's like, well, I told you how I am. See, the contrast is built into the context. Even though I don't say, oh, this is how I am. Good. How are you? Right? All of that is implied when I just say, how are you? Because I already told you how I am. So now you know how I am, and I want to know how you are. That's the purpose of that sentence, right? Or that question. So the actual grammatical meaning doesn't change, but there's a clear difference in why we would use one or the other. Do you have to stress the function word do to differentiate it from past in these sentences? Why are there so many English videos from native speakers? Wait, what? Are those the sentences? I don't see the sentences. I don't think you ever have to stress the function word do, because it's a function word, right? It's being used not as a main verb, but a helping verb. It's going to depend on the context. Okay, I want you to get that in your head. Context, 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 purpose, context, purpose, context, purpose. The default for a function word, for a one-syllable function word, is not stressed. If you don't have a special context or purpose, you're not going to stress it. Okay. Now, that special context or purpose could be like what we were talking about before with like, how are you? Or how things link in the flow of speech between how are you and how are you? Okay. That is built into the context, of course. You is usually not stressed. Are is usually not stressed. But in this case, those are the two that are being stressed, and one in each case. So there's a reason for that, right? There's always a reason for it. Okay. Why are there so many English videos from native speakers saying that how are you? I'm fine, thanks, and you is never used by natives. It's just in textbooks. This is one thing I see this sometimes, maybe like in thumbnails, because sometimes YouTube will recommend other teachers' videos to me. Or, I'll have a student ask me about it because some other teacher said this or that or whatever. And this is one problem I have with some other teachers, at least for some resources, is that there are things that, like, yeah, we just don't say, right? Like, even if it's grammatically correct, we don't say it that way, right? Like, say whom. Almost nobody in American English uses whom anymore, right? So don't use whom. Just use who all the time. But which I'm gonna have a lesson on that. Don't use whom. That's gonna be in the thumbnail probably. I see cases like this where they say like, oh, don't say very, right? Or don't say how are you, or something like that. And I'm just like, and I know their purpose. It's because yes, there are other things that you can say. There are especially much more informal things, like in the case of how are you, there's like, how's it hanging, how's it going, what's up, um et cetera, just off the top of my head. Or with very, right? Don't say very, say extremely, say I don't know, excessively. It depends on the context and the words we're using, what we're talking about. But yeah, you don't have to say very all the time. There's other words that you can use instead. Uh, that's all true. But when it comes to this particular thing, we say, how are you all the time? It's a normal thing. We don't tend to use it in, this is kind of hard to say exactly, because since our culture is relatively kind of more informal, the line is a little vague. But if we're talking to somebody that we know really, really well, or in the case of American culture, if we're saying hi to somebody that we don't know just to be polite, to acknowledge their existence, interestingly enough, we'll use it in this case also, even though that should be formal. We treat it very informally. But if it's talking to a friend or it's very, very informal, we're probably not going to say, how are you? Right? Or say, what's up? How's it going? And usually we don't actually care. We're just being nice. But especially if you're not in a really informal situation, like it could still be kind of informal, that's fine. But if you're in a formal situation, if you go to work, some bosses are really cool. This is one reason why I say American culture is generally more informal. Some bosses are cool, and you can say, hey, what's up, boss? And like they're okay with that. But depending on the work environment and what's expected within that company and this and that, whatever, a lot of times if you're at work, right, you don't want to say like, hey, what's up, boss? Or hey, how's it hanging, boss? Right? This is usually too informal for that type of setting, even in American English. And so if I go to my boss and say, hey, boss, how are you? Okay, now notice I didn't say, how are you? There's a reason for that. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can use how are you just fine. Okay, it does exist. We do use it. But I think a lot of teachers, they try to give like the shock value, like, oh, hey, you were taught this in your textbook, but guess what? It's wrong. When actually it's not wrong. It's just there are many other options that you have. And if there are teachers that actually, because I know sometimes the thumbnail is supposed to be shocking and catchy. It's like, don't say how are you? Don't say very. If they actually say in the lesson, or if it's like some online resource that you're reading, if they actually specifically say like, never say how are you, they're completely wrong and they're lying. They're completely wrong and they're lying. Just straight up. Okay. Compared to all the options we have to communicate that idea, yes, it's used less. Okay. But if you want to sound polite, not necessarily even formal, if you just want to sound sort of very neutral, polite, not formal, not informal, just kind of okay, whatever. Yeah. Like you're just trying to be nice. The safe option is always, how are you? It'll always work. If you're not sure, use that. But there are many other options. Yes. So it's not just in textbooks, that's for sure. I can't tell the good music from the bad music versus I can't tell the difference between the good music and exactly the same. I talked about, I think in the book, my book about the logic of prepositions, that exact type of case, why like using from can mean the difference. Like telling from can mean telling the difference. I'm pretty sure I have an example in the book about that. So you can look that up. But it's just the same thing. How can you tell a wolf from a dog versus how can you tell the difference between a wolf and a dog music? I think music isn't supposed to be there. How can you tell the difference from a wolf and a dog? It's the same thing, same meaning, just different words. Can I stress? There's a reason built into from. the logic of from and how it feels, how it's connected under the surface in the subconscious mind. There's a reason why tell something from something means the same thing as tell the difference between. They're just two different ways to say the same thing. Can I stress all the words, including do and you, in the following questions? Trying to express doubt. If you stress all the words, I might be wrong. Maybe there's some exception to this, but the only time that you're going to stress all of the words is if you're speaking very slowly and clearly and making sure that you pronounce every word, again, for a special reason. Maybe you're kind of angry, or you've had to repeat yourself several times and the person didn't listen, or they still don't understand you, right? Do you like potatoes? Okay. Notice I also probably fall there because, again, I'm a little frustrated. I'm a little angry. I want to pull it down. Doesn't mean you necessarily can't rise. Like, do you like potatoes? Okay. That can still work too. But especially if I have to repeat myself, right? I think we talked about that with pass back intonation in the falling intonation part 2. We fall at the end, right? Because I'm repeating myself. If I'm just angry and I'm repeating the question, say once, you can still rise, right? You can always still rise structurally, but it's probably going to fall. Anyway, the point is, if you want to express doubt, do you like potatoes? Do you like potatoes? That's kind of curious, maybe kind of doubtful. There's not always a clear line between certain things. Like doubt and curiosity can be very, very similar. Again, context is really important. I'm trying to think of just like in a vacuum. it's all this stuff is based on context. Doubt. Let's see. Okay, so let's say I'm getting to know you. We're talking about foods that we like. Okay, so that's the context. And I say, oh, do you like vegetables? And you're like, well, not really. I mean, some vegetables. And I say, okay, well, do you like broccoli? And you say, notice I rose there. There's a reason we can rise there. Say, do you like broccoli? Oh no, it's because I'm asking the question. Do you like broccoli? And you say, not really. Okay. Do you like carrots? They're all right. Do you like blah 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 blah? Say I go through like 10 things, right? And most of them are no, 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 no. So at this point, I'm starting to doubt that, like, I'm starting to think any option I give you, you're probably not going to like. So when I ask the question, I might put sort of some doubt into it, like, well, you probably also don't like this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, right? So if I say, well, let's see, do you like potatoes? Do you like potatoes? Do you like potatoes? Okay, that can express some doubt. We're going to talk about doubt in the masterclass as well. I still am exploring some of the possible variations and details of certain things, certain emotions. So I don't have all that pinpointed down in my like conscious brain yet. But yeah, you can do it like that. Like, do you like potatoes? Do you like potatoes? Wendell Wendell again. All the questions from Wendell. Okay. Is the O sound pronounced as a diphthong when words are stressed? When words are not stressed, we need a T there. The O sound is pronounced as a monophthong. No, that has nothing to do with anything. No. The O sound can be pronounced as a diphthong. It can be pronounced as a monophthong. It doesn't particularly matter. There's some subtle details here, blah, 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 but it has nothing to do with the stress at all. Nothing to do with the stress. What I will say, in a sense, I don't want to say that's true because it's not, but in a way it can kind of be sort of true in a way. Because like, say when we say a, the diphthong a, oftentimes we drop the end of that and we just say like day. Do you have a good day? Day. So that's actually making it into a monophthong. But we'll either do that or we'll kind of start to go towards the end point and then just not get all the way into like a full diphthong. O can kind of work like that if you're speaking really lazily or maybe really quickly. So it's not really about the stress. But because unstressed syllables tend to be shorter and quieter, it can have something of an effect on it, but it's not because of the stress. It's because of how clearly you're pronouncing the sound. We're going to explore all that in when we talk more about the sounds with mouth posture, which is still in development. You need to go there versus you don't need to go there. Are these two sentences equivalent and have a proper grammar order? You need to go there. That's fine. You don't need to go there. That's also fine. So grammatically, they're fine. They're not equivalent. They're opposites. If I say, sorry, I missed not in the first one. My brain completely skipped over that. I was like, oh, there's a not there. Okay, yeah, no. Scratch what I just said. Okay, so you need not go there. Okay, yeah, still grammatically correct. They are equivalent. Yes, they are the same. But the first one sounds dated. It sounds kind of old-timey, like maybe you came from like 100, 200 years in the past. In fact, we might put a British accent on it even, like, you need not go there. It is grammatically correct. You can use it. It just, we're not going to, probably. It can also, because it sounds dated, it can also sound very, very formal. So you might hear, like in popular culture, you might hear, for example, say Batman, right? Alfred, his butler, who, tends to speak more formally to, Master Bruce, might formulate it like this because it sounds a bit more formal, sounds a bit more fancy, more educated in a way, like, you need not go there, Master Bruce, right? So it does exist. You'll hear it here and there, but most likely we're going to say you don't need to go there. Yeah. You need not go there. You don't need to go there. Yeah. I guess I perceive S as a longer sound because this is going back to what we were talking at the beginning, talking about at the beginning. Skipped a word. I guess I perceive S as a longer sound because it's an alveolar sound in English, and you can't really make it very fast or subtle comparing to a very fast or subtle Russian S. I suppose my knowledge of Russian pronunciation is very limited. I do know, obviously, you have a very different posture, and that's causing some problems. I'm working with a Russian right now, and he's having trouble making the English N sound, which was very surprising. But it has a lot to do with actually the posture and the way that the N is usually made in Russian, apparently. It's very interesting because like N seems like one of the most basic, simple sounds, and yet posture can have a big effect. So I can't comment on Russian, but within English, American English specifically, particularly, you can make an S fast or subtle based on your overall speed and based on how clearly you pronounce it. So there's a range to it. There's a lazy S, which is like, it's usually faster. It's very lazy. So you hear it's very light. It's a little harder to hear, but it's still there. So it's not any other sound. It's not a TH. It's not a, whatever. It's not an SH. Okay. If I say it more clearly, which we tend to get a little bit of a whistle on it, it's kind of a core part of the sound. So yeah, all of that would kind of be within the range of the S, depending on how fast you're speaking, how lazily you're speaking. So keep that in mind. A pure perfect S would be right, very whistly, very clear, very crisp. But it doesn't always work that way because the pronunciation is dynamic. However, the mouth posture is always there. Compared to a very fast, already that. How is the ice cream chocolate is a correct answer, or there is another way? Chocolate is not an answer to that question. If you say, how is the ice cream, that means that the person you're talking to is eating ice cream, or maybe they have eaten the ice cream before, or maybe they're selling the ice cream. and you're asking like, what is the quality of the ice cream? Is it good? Is the ice cream good? It has nothing to do with the flavor. The question for that would be, what is the ice cream? Yeah, and even then we probably wouldn't say it necessarily that way, but that would work. Like what we probably say, what kind of ice cream is it? But if you say what's the ice cream, that works, and you would answer like, oh, chocolate, vanilla, whatever. No. Thanks in advance. You're welcome. Okay, Alan. I see David is here. Welcome, David. Fernando is here. Welcome, Fernando. Trying to catch up, guys. Bear with me. Alan is here. So sometimes when you say the word tell, I hear a schwa instead of vowel E. Am I crazy? So when you say vowel E, I assume you mean the eh sound. Because if you just put the letter E, we pronounce it, the name of that letter is E, and that makes me think of the E sound. But obviously I'm not saying teal. That's a different word. So you're not crazy. You're not crazy. What you're hearing is the mouth posture. Okay. If I, well, mouth posture and a little bit of the dynamic range here, because I may not always be fully enunciating it. So if let's say I say this word, I say it super clearly, right? Fully enunciated. Tell, tell, tell. Okay. You can hear that you hear that pull into the L. Okay. Now, if you listen very, very closely, there's actually a little in there. It's not a fully formed it's not, but the center of gravity is there. Now we sort of pass over kind of where that is. That's not what I'm saying. That's where you'll probably hear it the clearest, but it's always in there. It's just what mouth posture does, at least in American English, it kind of takes the center of gravity and shapes it into different sounds, but it's always there. There's always a core tension here that holds that posture. So you can hear. If I remove the center of gravity there, and I just try to do like an sound without it, see if I can do this. It's really hard for me to do. eh, 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 eh. Still have a little bit of the posture, a little bit of pressure in the middle, but that kind of sounds a little flat. It kind of sounds like, yeah, it's the same sound, but and most people probably say like, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine sound. But if I go into the way I normally say it, eh, 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 eh. There's a little bit you can hear side by side. I barely hear a difference as well. It's a very subtle thing here that we're talking about. It doesn't actually matter too much. I'm just trying to demonstrate how the center of gravity is always there. But okay. When we go into the center of gravity is sort of shifting forward. It's still there, just slightly. It's not a full obviously we're in and then as I go from I don't go into I don't say L, right? But I sort of pass over it. That tension is still there. As I go into ul, that center of gravity is still there. It's just shifted. That's how the mouth posture works. And that might seem kind of confusing and not make a lot of sense, but as we go more through the mouth posture lessons, as I develop more of that, it's going to start making a lot of sense. My most advanced students in the mouth posture course, they actually came to me. Like I already saw it that way, but before I told them that, they came to me and they're like, oh, it's actually, we're just kind of moving the schwa around the mouth in different ways to create different sounds. It's a very abstract way to describe it, but ultimately it is true, kind of. So there's always a little bit of the shape and feeling and pressure of in every sound in American English. Okay. In whatever way. And that'll become clear through the mouth posture lessons later. But anyway, let's say that I say L kind of lazily, L, instead of L, 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 L. Okay. Again, the mouth posture is always still there, but because it's a little lazier, I'm actually pulled a little closer to that center of gravity because I'm not fully extending into the So it's already a little, maybe a little easier to hear the in there. And then I'm probably not going to go fully into the ul either. L, L, L. And so what you're hearing is that maintenance of the center of gravity. It becomes a little bit easier it stands out just a little bit easier compared to if I fully extend into E or the fully extend into the ul, where it tends to be a little shallower because it's being stretched around more. This is a real thing. This is an actual real thing. Now, it could be a little bit with your ears being off, but you're actually probably hearing the posture. And you can actually train your ears a bit for that. For me, I've just focused a lot on my mouth. Like I'm not always conscious of it, but like right now, as I'm talking to you, if I'm paying attention to what my tongue is doing, if I focus on a particular sound, I feel, okay, my tongue's doing that particular sound. But if I try to focus on the center of gravity where the posture is supposed to be in American English, which is that sound, no matter what sound I make, no matter what I'm saying, no matter how I'm transitioning between this sound or that sound, it feels almost like my tongue is constantly just doing this around that point. Sometimes it gets shallower. And I mean, it's not always there. It's not like we're always going into fully or anything like that. Sometimes it gets shallower. Sometimes it kind of shifts a bit. But I can always feel this sort of central point of pressure no matter what I'm saying, if I pay attention to it. It's really amazing. So anyway, moving on. I don't know if you saw my comment I posted in response to yours. In case you didn't, I'm just leaving it here. And then I don't see a further comment. So I don't know if maybe that didn't paste. Maybe there's a link in it and it won't let you paste it because it won't paste links. So I don't know. I don't think I got that. No. Let me go back over the comments here. Is there another comment on this? No. Okay, I don't know what that's referring to. Okay, this kind of reminds me of epistemic viciousness, where theory doesn't match reality. Epistemic viciousness. I like that. That sounds really cool. I don't know what that is, but it sounds really cool. I've never heard of that. In most martial arts, you've got some senseis who actually believe the BS they teach, but in reality, it's useless. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I don't want to go into a big long thing about this. I think there's a reason why it's called theory. It doesn't mean that's wrong or inaccurate, but it's an attempt to formally describe and even maybe to formally prescribe, right, things that maybe you should do related to that topic, right? But when it comes to the actual doing of the thing, right? Like I could sit and watch, MMA all day long for a year. And then I could feel like, oh yeah, there's this and this and whatever. And I saw this guy do this. And I could feel it. Yeah, I got it. And then I actually go and get in a fight. And let's say maybe even I actually have some basic ability, but I've never actually been in a real fight, right? Maybe just like sort of practice some things. Oh, I got a good punch. Okay. Reality is reality. There's so much more in reality, where theory is like a vacuum. Not only is it a description, but it's a vacuum, right? Reality, not only do you have to actually do the thing, but you have to do the thing interacting with the world. So if that's a fight, obviously you have to actually, now there's a fear of, or there's a danger of being hurt, where if you're watching MMA and you're practicing punches, there's no fear of being hurt, right? Now you're for real. Same thing, speaking a language, right? It's a very common thing that maybe your basic speaking ability is pretty solid, right? Like you can talk about stuff, but as soon as you start talking to another person, especially a native speaker, your speaking ability drops a bit. And that's because of other things that are going on in your brain, due to the fact that now you're actually interacting with a real person. So, yeah, I don't think it's like there are good senseis out there, and the best senseis, they emphasize fundamentals and high iterations. That's the path to skill building, especially if you want to learn quickly. Doesn't matter what the skill is. Fundamentals through high iterations. Lots of immediate feedback. Okay. Not anything fancy like flying kicks and this and that. It's like the bare basic fundamentals, like say in judo, practicing your falls. You learn how to fall before you learn how to throw somebody for safety reasons. You're always going to practice your falls. You're going to practice throwing yourself. You're going to practice doing shoulder rolls. You're going to be practicing falls for your entire career doing judo, because it's the basics of the basics. Like, it seems like you're above it, but you're not. And that's in any field. The masters, they always spend a lot of time, maybe even most of their time, refining the basics. And most people, right, think that it's the opposite. The higher you go, the more complicated stuff you're working on. No, it's your control of the basics that allows you to do more and more fancy, complicated things. So yeah, and there are some not so great senseis out there, of course. But yes, good. So that just helps to validate what I was saying. I'm not some crazy guy saying that theory sucks. But I don't completely dump on theory. There is a role for theory. There is a purpose to it. It's just, it generally tends to be more academic, right? And it's not always useful in the actual development or use of the skill. It might be true, but it doesn't mean it's useful. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are having a nice Sunday. Yes, David is in the house. Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. Me like the poster on the wall. Me like, yeah. That's a good use. Very native. Like, everybody's like, me, David made a mistake. No, well, technically it is a grammar mistake, but it's very natural. Yeah, we're on attention. And something I was hoping to get a refresher on is the difference between A and A worth stressing on. No, not at all. In fact, the way that I teach, the second one doesn't exist. Doesn't even exist. You don't even have to worry about it. I can pronounce A fine, but I tend to slip up and say A when I stop paying attention sometimes. Does A strike you as blatantly non-native realization? Okay, so if I say, we'll say. Yeah, it's maybe if I'm getting really lazy and I'm speaking quickly enough and I happen to open more into E instead of the start of A, it might not be noticed, but if you're trying to say A, which I can't think of a word that would actually use that, but if you're trying to say A as opposed to A, which I know they sound the same, it's hard for me to actually drop into the E part intentionally because it doesn't exist, at least in the way that I speak or the way that I teach it. If you intentionally try to do that and it becomes very clear, it's going to sound weird. It's going to sound like maybe you're playing with the language, like the Fawns, right? Happy Days. Like you could just say A, or you could say A, like you're really going down into that S sound. It just sounds like you're playing with the language, or it'll just sound weird. Yeah. I don't know if anybody teaches that as a dip song, but ignore it. A few countries. Okay, so Papua New Guinea. Papua. So it's Papua New Guinea. And it would be more like Pua than Pua. It's not really blended like that. Papua. I guess you could blend it, but it sounds weird to me. New Guinea. So it looks like Guinea. Guinea. Very simple. The second one, I've never heard of this country. So I would probably say Lesotho. Maybe it's Lesotho. I don't know what the TH would be, but Lesotho, I'd probably say. Bhutan. Some people might say Bhutan. I'm not sure, but I think I've heard Bhutan more. Gambia. I think some people say Gambia. Might be more British, but Gambia. I would say Gam. And this isn't a country. Probably Jan Mayen Island. You could probably shift the N and the M there and say like Jan Mayen. So just kind of drop the N, Jan Mayen. That could be a linking rule, but otherwise it'd be just Jan Mayen. Yeah. Vietnam. Nam or Vietnam? Yeah, so a lot of people, especially I hear a lot of older people pronounce it that way, Vietnam. Like I was in I was in Nam in 70 whatever, I don't know, whatever the year was. Uh, what the way I pronounce it and the way that I have heard it more from people who aren't older is Nam. So I don't know if maybe that's a way that's shifted between generations or something, but you can say either way. It doesn't matter. They both sound fine. I would also point out so the first part, it looks like the way you're spelling is like Viet, et, which is fine. Viet, 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 Viet. Both work just fine. I think you can even do a schwa there. Vietnam. Yeah, you can make it a schwa. So you can do or there. All in work. That's actually probably a with two possible reductions. There are words like that, like believe has e with and as a reduction. Good. So there you go. Why do native speakers stress "are" in the phrase "How are you"? Isn't it a functional? I explained that earlier. Hopefully, we have that answer because I already explained that. Short answer: it's because of the purpose and context of the phrase. Long answer: you can go back and watch that. What I described about that. Geography 101 with English hacks. Yes, exactly. I'm an American, okay? You don't want to ask me geography questions. When you're part of the empire, you kind of just don't know geography very well. I cringe anytime I see "how do you do?" Yeah, that. That sounds super formal. Even in contexts that are formal, you probably wouldn't use that. That is a good example of something that you might find in textbooks that we don't actually use. Yeah, unless I'm trying to intentionally create a certain effect, like I'm again playing with the language, like, oh, how do you do? In real life, no, I don't think anybody would really ever say that. Can we have that conversation? Are we ready for this conversation? Maybe. Which Amber Heard. Okay. Yeah, it was so big that even I heard a bit about it, and I don't pay any attention to these things. So I'm not up on all the details. Or is it over? I assume it's over. The trial is over, I guess. So I don't even know that. How do you think Amber Heard will pay all her legal fees? Apparently, she wants to appeal the jury's unanimous verdict. Okay, so it is over. I have no idea. I don't really care. Sucks for her. She shouldn't have been a horrible person. Especially to Johnny Depp, of all people. Like, he's such a lovable actor. Like, why would you be mean to him? I don't really have a comment. I don't care. Yeah. So I'll just move on. I don't understand why people care about this trial. Yeah, I don't either. Probably because it's Johnny Depp, right? Like, humans like to see justice, right? And when we see an injustice, we want it to be corrected. So, and it's something for people to, distract themselves with as the world is falling apart. So that's the media's job. Scare you so that you distract yourself. That's what the media does these days. Scare you so you distract yourself. Or just straight up misinform you. Very big part of the mainstream media's job these days. Anyway, that's a different topic. Do you think being able to pronounce all the necessary English sounds and knowing intonation very well is enough for starting to practice shadowing? Okay. Being able to pronounce all the necessary English sounds and knowing intonation very well is enough for starting to practice shadowing. trying to think of the, not just my answer, but what is objectively the best answer. So there's more than one way to do things. Do I think that it's enough? Is it sufficient? Yeah. Probably. See, we have cases like, this is why this is a little complicated. There's no one right answer to say, but we have cases like Matt versus Japan. I don't know all the details about him. I'm aware of him. I saw an interview that he did, and I watched a little bit of his content. But my understanding is he basically locked himself in a room for an extended period of time and absorbed Japanese content. It kind of got into his brain. He did realize at one point the importance of the pronunciation and the pitch accent, and how his pronunciation was pretty good, but he didn't have the pitch accent, and so he had to kind of like dive in and train himself for the pitch accent and the intonation stuff. But after that, now, right, if somebody, any Japanese person who listens to him, if they don't actually see him, they just assume he's a native speaker. Now, I think, I don't know everything he did. I don't know if he shadowed much. My understanding is that he didn't. I don't know. Maybe he did. But regardless, I don't think that he used the concept of mouth posture or was aware of mouth posture. And there are many polyglots or just language learners who speak extremely well and native-like or very close to it, who never heard the concept of mouth posture. And I mentioned mouth posture because, to me, the more and more that I work with mouth posture, the more that I see it as probably the single best way to build an accent into your mouth. It also helps your listening as well, apparently. It's not the easiest way, but it does seem to be the most efficient and solid way so far, based on what I've learned through exploring it and teaching it. So I would like to point you in the direction of mouth posture, not just like trying to get the sounds, but actually like building the posture and building sounds into the posture. And shadowing becomes, at some point, shadowing becomes a natural part of that process. Intonation, like grammar, you technically don't have to, like, there's this whole industry on YouTube of English teachers that are teaching you grammar, or they're teaching you pronunciation rules, and they're teaching you all these rules and then all this stuff. And that's fine. There's use to that. Obviously, I'm in that same game in whatever way. But at the end of the day, it's 100% possible. I don't think it's the best. I don't think it's the most efficient, but it is 100% possible that if you pay attention, you never have to study grammar. You never have to study pronunciation rules, right? The way that people speak, whether it's grammatically or pronunciation-wise, is there. It's there for you to hear. It's there for you to, for your brain to perceive and interpret and understand. If you pay enough attention, either to the grammar and or to the pronunciation, like say intonation rules, you don't actually have to study intonation rules. Okay. Is there benefit to it? Yes. If they're presented in a really interesting and unique way that discovered an underlying hidden engine of how it works in the mind of subconsciously of an American speaker, is that useful? Yes, I think so, because that's what I'm doing. I'm giving you a way to hack into it. But technically, you could start shadowing right away without learning anything about intonation, as long as you're paying attention to the context, to the exact way that people are saying things, not just in terms of the sound, but that intonation, right? You have to learn to hear the stress, hear the sounds, hear the intonation, right? There's different levels of ear training. It's not just hearing the difference between E and I, it's hearing the difference between stressed and unstressed. It's hearing the difference between, if I say, I want to go to the beach, versus I want to go to the beach, versus I want to go to the beach. Okay. All the words are the same, But obviously I'm saying them with different intonation, different ways, or there's different thing going on there in each case. So, and then learning from context, again, this is where some rules help, because it can help cut through the need for so much context that Matt vs. Japan got. But through the context, realizing, oh, I notice that when people tend to speak like this, they seem to be bored or disinterested or maybe very sad, right? So you do need enough exposure. You do need to be exposed to various different contexts, but you start to see patterns of like, oh, natives tend to sound this way for this effect. Natives tend to sound that way for that effect. Okay. All that being said, when it comes to the actual formation of the sounds, that is the one thing that I don't think is absorbable. Maybe it is. I don't know. If you ask me, I would say no. It needs direct training, especially if you want to sound like a native. And that goes down to the sound formation level, which is below shadowing. That's like actually finding how to do eh if your language doesn't have eh, right? You're not just going to magically absorb and be able to pronounce that sound. Maybe theoretically, if you train your ears to hear the difference, like clear difference between e, eh, and you always hear the difference like pretty much 100% of the time, your brain might theoretically, maybe there's some engine in the brain that will allow through that perception to start affecting the way that you use your tongue to match the sound. Theoretically, I don't know. That's just an idea. Maybe it can work that way. But as far as I know, you have to go in and actually build the sounds. And you might as well build it into the posture, because sounds don't float in the mouth. They're rooted in a posture. This is probably a much bigger answer than you were looking for. What I would recommend, right? You can start shadowing whenever. There's some people who start shadowing from day one, and there's a lot of use in that. I'm not saying don't do that. Me personally, if you want to do that, it's valid. It'll help you. It's fine. If you ask me directly, personally, what do I think is the best that I would recommend based on my experience and my my way of looking at things, I would say that you don't want to shadow until you start building the posture, at the very least. You should get control of your vocal tract. Phase 0 has nothing to do with the posture. Allows you to start building the central posture and know what that feels like. And then from there, you can maybe decide to start adding in some shadowing or not. But even then, I wouldn't recommend that, because as you guys will see, as I make more of the mouth posture lessons, when I get to the point that I can do that, if you can start building in certain vowel sounds and then bring in certain consonant sounds and then start combining them, you're naturally going to start shadowing, and it's going to naturally start getting longer and longer into multiple syllables, multiple words, multiple sentences. But the posture is built into it from the ground up the whole way. And to me, it's sort of like it has a slow startup. You have to get through that initial phase, unfortunately. But once you get the ball rolling, it creates a snowball effect. And in the long run, you're actually probably going to learn a lot faster and easier. And your shadowing practice is going to be even more beneficial. And you're probably not going to develop any really bad habits or fossils. Like, say, instead of saying "I," you always say "E" because you never knew that "I" existed. You never heard it. That would be a fossil. So every time there's "I" or "E," you say "E." Obviously, that's a problem in English. So if you build the mouth posture, you can avoid a lot of the fossilization and things. Or if you already have some fossilization, it's actually really good to help to undo some of that fossilization. But it's not easy. It does take work. Probably not for everybody, but I do think it's, in my personal opinion, it's the best step-by-step way to go through it, and then shadowing will come as a part of it in the second half. To me, at the very least, phase 0, where you're just getting control over the vocal tract, to me, I feel very firmly about this, regardless of what's, you know, the best or everybody's different or any of that. You should not shadow before phase 0. If you don't have control of your vocal tract, shadowing is pointless. It's absolutely pointless. And that should make sense, right? Like if you can't get your mouth to do what you want it to do, and then now you're trying to shadow like phrases and sentences, there's a lot of sounds, there's stress, there's unstress, there's all these pieces moving, and you don't even have complete control over how to make your mouth move the way that it should move in order to sound like what you're hearing. So at the very least, you should do phase 0. That I think is a 100% requirement in order to make your shadowing practice as effective as possible from as early a point as you want. Like if you want to start doing it right away, fine, but do phase 0 first. So I would definitely recommend that, if nothing else. Okay, with whom or with who, or with whom or who with. You don't have to switch the who and the with. You can say with who with. It doesn't matter. Do not use whom. Do not use whom. Do not use whom. No whom. No m. No whom ever. Don't use it. Don't use it. There are some people who still use it. You will still hear it here and there. Most of them are highly, highly educated, like more than the average person. And because whom is not really used very much by the average person anymore, it's starting to sound very formal. And it actually has, to me at least, I don't know about all natives, but it does seem to have a bit of a feeling of like because you're using that word, because you're choosing to use the grammatically correct form that nobody uses anymore, it can give the impression to the listener that you think you're better than them because you're more sophisticated, right? Not everybody's going to get that impression, but I know at least some people will. I very, very strongly recommend you not to use whom. Do not use whom. Okay, it's a dying word. It's disappearing from the language, slowly but surely, at least in American English. And you can say with who with, doesn't matter. They're both the same. I'm going to the party. With who? I'm going to the party. Who with? Usually it'll be with who, actually. We'll probably put who later, after. But it doesn't matter. Don't use whom. Okay, it was a link there, so yeah, that explains it. I didn't think it would delete a comment here, though. Whatever. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about Chris? I was around. Didn't you ask me that last time? Somebody asked me that last time. I don't know. I haven't watched it. I still haven't watched it. How to distinguish do and did in the sentences? Do. Okay, dewy, 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 dewy. So you have an oo to a w, dewy. Okay, did we, did we, did we. So here you have an I plus a d plus a w. Okay, so the way you distinguish it is because one uses an oo and the other one uses an id. I'm not sure. I understand that based on your native language, based on people, individuals within themselves, we can have issues hearing certain things. That's perfectly fine. That's normal. Everybody's a little bit different, but this is a case that I'm actually kind of surprised. Like there shouldn't be any difficulty there. Maybe if people are speaking really quickly, you have a little trouble. I imagine, or if I say do we like potatoes or did we like potatoes, that you'd probably be able to hear it, but yeah, it's very clearly different, at least to us. You might be referring to any sort of stress difference. You could maybe do that, but it's context. It wouldn't be the normal thing to do. Any advice on how to speak clearly regardless? Oh, welcome, Cyber. How to speak clearly regardless of language. I've used some tricks like speaking with something in my mouth, but still people struggle to understand me. Okay, so you're asking how to speak clearly, but you put something in your mouth, that's going to make you sound less clear. I guess the idea there is maybe because you're trying to form the sounds while still having something in your mouth. If you remove the thing from your mouth after practicing that way, that you would sound clearer because you have better control over the sounds. Theoretically, I suppose there could be some benefit to that, but that just sounds counterproductive and doesn't make much sense. Like you're literally doing the opposite thing of your goal. So no, that's no. Throw that out. Mouth posture. Probably sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, but mouth posture, mouth posture, mouth posture, mouth posture, mouth posture. Zombie horse, mouth posture. Yeah. So, and the reason why I say that, I'm not just saying that to be funny. So, take Russian, for example. One thing I do know about Russian is that, especially within Russian itself, Russians, and this isn't my experience, I've been told this by many Russians. Russians, when they speak, they don't open their mouths very much, and that's partially because the posture is already more closed. They don't need a lot of space in their mouth, but when Russians speak, they kind of do this, right? And I'm sure there's maybe times where they open their mouths more, they emphasize this, that, whatever. But it seems the general consensus, based off of my experience, my limited experience, and the people that I've talked to who are Russians, that Russian doesn't tend to have much with the mouth opening. Now, does that make Russian unclear? Not in Russian. Now, a Russian speaker comes to American English and they start speaking like this all the time, right? Even if the sounds are really good. Okay, I'm right now, I'm trying to more or less speak the way that I normally do with my normal posture. The only thing I'm changing is that I'm keeping my mouth more closed than I normally would. And what's the effect? I sound less clear. Why? Because American English mouth posture is more open. That creates a default level of clearness or clarity that the listener expects. Now, if I go to Russian and I use American posture and I'm saying words like this all the time the way I normally would, but I'm trying to make the Russian sounds, but my mouth is too open, I'm probably either, number one, I'm just not going to be able to make certain sounds naturally, and or two, I'm probably going to sound maybe like I'm over enunciating a lot of things, or I'm trying to speak excessively clearly, even though I'm not. I'm just trying to speak, right? Or whatever effect it might have in Russian. I don't know how natives would perceive it, but it's not going to seem right, even though you would think more space, clearer, right? But that's not the case because it's relative to the language. So the only advice that I would have here is figure out the mouth posture of that language and start matching how open it is, how open or closed it is. Breath is also an important part. It seems many languages don't use as much breath, and one of the functions of the breath is to clearly hear the sounds. Many languages don't need that much breath. I know Spanish uses just a little bit less breath than English, American English at least. I know that for a fact because I've talked to some natives from various places and played with it myself, and I've confirmed that. And it's a very, very small difference, but it's a big difference compared to what you're used to, but it's a small difference objectively. And let's see, if I try to keep everything the same, my mouth is open, I'm still forming all the sounds right, but I'm not breathing out as much. Obviously, there's some air coming out, but see, again, it doesn't sound as clear. And that's because just like a certain amount of openness with not just the jaw, but with the back of the mouth and the throat, there's a certain default level of openness in different parts of the vocal tract. American English overall is quite open compared to many languages, even compared to British English, which is more closed. What was I saying? That's my thought there. But yeah, the breath, that's another thing that in American English, we want to sort of hear the sounds flow out on the breath. It's not enough just to be breathing, right? Obviously, you can do too much where now you sound breathy, right? The breath is drowning out the actual voice. That's too much. Okay, so it's a fine little balance. But the purpose of that is for clarity. Now, if you go to Spanish or probably Russian or whatever, and I use this amount of breath, I was exploring this very topic with my old Spanish partner like a month ago. And I was trying to adjust some things into the posture, and I was doing pretty good, but she kept saying too much breath, too much breath. It sounded too breathy for Spanish. Even I was just using American English breath. But when she would listen and she'd be like, there's too much breath there. Maybe she wouldn't notice if I was just, flowing, but because we're talking about the mouth posture, and she's like, okay, how perfect does it sound? How native does it sound? There's too much breath. And you would think more breath is clearer. Well, if that's the case, this should be the clearest, right? So it's relative to what that language or dialect expects, right? What is the amount of openness? What is the amount of breath flow? So those are probably the two things you want to pay attention to. Figure out, which it's hard to do. It's really hard to figure these two details out, especially the level of breath, because it's such a small difference. But if you can go in and you can figure out how relatively open or closed the jaw and the rest of the vocal tract are, and then how relatively more or less the amount of breath tends to be, those two things are going to help you adjust into the clarity of the language. And note that just because one part is open doesn't necessarily mean another part is open. American English tends to be pretty open throughout. Based on my work with one German speaker who's one of my most advanced mouth posture students right now. Again, it's a sample size of one, so might not be the answer, but based on what he was telling me and what we discovered, German mouth posture seems to be quite open, like American English. It doesn't seem to be as closed as Russian or Spanish, but the tongue is still kind of pushed forward a bit. There's a sort of back tension going on that American English doesn't have, and there was, especially up around here, sort of towards the top, but the throat was a bit more closed. And that was affecting his level of breath as well, but you could hear this extra tension in his throat. So even though the jaw was maybe relatively more open compared to other languages that they're more closed, the throat was actually a little more closed. So sometimes it's, uniformly kind of closed, uniformly kind of open. Sometimes the jaw might be more open and the throat might be a little more closed, or maybe even vice versa. I don't know. So it's not just the one thing, but you got to figure out what that is. And the best way that I recommend trying to do that is really, really, really train your ears. Okay. Learn how to hear your native language, and then learn how to listen for openness and breath in that new language. And that's going to help you, based on listening to your native language very closely and playing with it, and in comparison, listening to those specific details. That's what will help you develop the ability to start hearing it. Because even for me, I have to keep remembering when I'm working with mouth posture students to keep working the breath in, because if I'm not paying attention to the breath, it's very easy to miss. But as soon as I say, okay, wait, hold on, the sound is a little bit off, there's something missing, the posture seems to be there. Oh, wait, breathe out a little bit more. And as soon as they breathe out a little bit more, sounds perfect, right? So it's a really easy thing to forget because it's such a small, subtle little thing, unless their natural level of breath is like drastically different. So you got to pay attention to it. You got to pay very close attention to it. Okay, I am running out of time. I do have to go at 2:00 today, guys. So because of that, hopefully I can finish up here, but no more comments or questions, because I do have a solid deadline here where I have to leave. So let's see if we can finish this up. By the way, do you use the full S in, oh, okay, so you use the full comma. Okay. I was reading that wrong. You use the full S in niece, right? If you speak more or less clearly, at least. You mean like a fully enunciated niece? or niece, fully enunciated S. I have to make a specific lesson just on this. It's complicated. It's so complicated to give you the pieces and teach them very simply. The way that English works, especially American English in particular, I don't know all the details of British English or whatever, but for American English at least, it's a dynamic range and flow, which is determined in terms of like the how clearly or not clearly the sounds are produced. It's a dynamic range and flow. There's a little bit of a range for every sound, like I was talking about earlier. The placement of the sound can have some effect, like if it's at the end of a word and there's nothing after it, so it's it's like the end of a sentence. It can kind of maybe be sort of seem a little bit shorter because we have that falling intonation and it kind of fades away. It's relative to that, cases like that. But for the most part, depending on how clearly and slowly you're speaking on a progressive scale to how fast, right, how much faster you're speaking and how much lazier you're speaking, because they're not the same thing, but the speed and the laziness tend to go together for the most part. So if for some reason, let's say I just say, oh, I saw your niece the other day. I saw your niece the other day. Okay, so I'm speaking at a normal speed. It's not super, super fast. I'm obviously not speaking super slow and clearly enunciated. I saw your niece the other day. Okay, it's just, right? It's probably not going to be 100% enunciated. Like, I saw your niece the other day. I saw your niece the other day. See, now it sounds like I'm kind of emphasizing the word a little bit just by trying to make the sound clear, because that's not how I'm speaking overall. Okay. But if I say, I saw your niece the other day. I saw your niece the other day. Now it's not just the S I'm trying to make clear. I'm making that whole word the focus word for whatever reason I'm emphasizing your niece compared to somebody else, maybe, I don't know. But whatever the purpose is for me to make niece the focus word, now making that S clearer and fuller and more enunciated is a natural byproduct of giving it that focus. Okay. So that's one factor, right? If I give it the focus, every sound in the word is going to be pronounced more clearly, not just that one sound. Now, let's say I say, I saw your niece the other day. Now, I need a special reason to do that, right? Maybe I've said that 2 times and you're on your phone, you're not paying attention. What? I say, okay, listen, I saw your niece the other day. Okay, notice I even said which we almost never unreduce the. It can happen, but we almost never do it relatively to how often we do it. In that case, I'm saying everything more slowly. I'm saying everything more clearly for a special reason. But notice that S, not just the S, but every sound is fuller and more enunciated because I'm in this slower, clearer, more enunciated mode of speaking. Okay. In the normal speed of things, you don't want to create a random, fully enunciated, clear S sound because it's just going to either sound weird or it's going to sound like you're trying to emphasize niece. And then it'll just sound weird anyway, because why are the other sounds in that word not as clear? The only time that you would do something like that is if you're actually contrasting a sound. So like if we're talking more meta and I say like, okay, so there's like rise and rice, see? So I'm putting a little focus on the Z or the S. That's where that would make more sense, to just isolate one word or one sound clearly. Otherwise, you're not going to do that. Okay, you're not going to do that. Now, if I'm speaking really, really quickly and I say, I saw your niece the other day. Now, it might be a little hard to hear. You can still hear the S in there, right? It's still there, but it's lazier. Saw your niece the other day. I'm not even saying the. I'm actually blending the S. Might slightly push forward to the TH. That has to do with like lazy linking and stuff. And then dropping into niece the other day, niece the other day. Okay, so I'm not saying I saw your niece the other day. I saw your niece the other day. Niece the other day. Like that's just it ruins the entire flow, right? You don't want to make a clear S there because the speed that I'm speaking does not allow a fully enunciated S sound. Okay, so speed and or laziness, which generally go together, depends on your mode. So most of the time we spend in this normal range. There's a little bit of a slower normal, a little bit of a faster normal, but we tend to operate within this. And the sound, any individual sound will be more clearly enunciated inside of a word that is being emphasized. But it's not just that one sound, it's all the sounds in that word. Okay. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. That's how the language works. Okay. So, yeah. Oh, Delio's here. Yeah, Matt did shadow. He even has a video on the perfect side for shadow. Oh, okay, good. So he did do shadowing. So that's good to know that he didn't just absorb it. Because I was thinking maybe he could be an exception for that, for absorbing pronunciation. But yeah, if he shadowed, that makes a lot more sense to me. So again, I don't know if he knew about mouth posture. If he did anything with mouth posture, probably not. It's a relatively unknown concept. But see, that shows that you don't have to use mouth posture. But just because you don't have to use it doesn't mean that it's not useful or that it's maybe not more efficient. So, everybody's different. I didn't know about mouth posture before, and, I still really support shadowing. I think shadowing is one of the single best tools for language learning in general. You can even apply it to like grammar structure and things like that as well, but especially as a pronunciation tool. It's one of the single best tools you have. But now that I know about mouth posture and I've been exploring more and learning more about mouth posture, that really seems to be like the thing. And then shadowing kind of goes along with it at some point. That's how I'm looking at things now. Anyway, how to say in English these Spanish expressions. Okay. Interesting. So this is where your questions about the ice cream come from. So, ¿de qué es el helado? I don't even want to try to say it because my Spanish is so rusty. I just it's just going to sound horrible. ¿De qué es el helado? I can't even do that. El helado. That's a tongue twister for me. Es de chocolate. Es de chocolate. So notice I say chocolate, right? It's more of an English A sound instead of the actual Spanish, like chocolate. So it has to do with a bit with the American posture. And when I was teaching myself Spanish, I thought it was A, like in English. I didn't realize that it was actually just a monophthong. I learned that later. So it's a fossil I have. Anyway, point is here, how to say it in English. So literally translated, I would translate it as of what is the ice cream. Of what is the ice cream. Now, we wouldn't say it that way in English. It does kind of make sense in a weird way. So we would reformulate that. So a somewhat direct translation would be, what is the ice cream of? But we wouldn't just say that. We would say made of. What is the ice cream made of? So obviously there's not really a good direct translation here. And I don't even know if that would be the best way to translate it into English. But that, like, I don't know if that's the exact intention of the meaning in Spanish. But that would be my understanding. Remember, my Spanish isn't perfect. I don't know everything. If you say "es de chocolate," that would be like it's of chocolate. It's literally of chocolate. So we would say it's made of chocolate, but that's not how we would say that in English. We would just say it's chocolate. We're going to say it's made of chocolate because it sounds like you have chocolate. I mean, technically, it is true, right? If it's chocolate ice cream, it's made of chocolate. There's chocolate in the ice cream, but we don't really think of it that way. That sounds like there's chocolate, and there like the chocolate itself becomes ice cream, where the way that we think about it is more like there's ice cream and the flavor is chocolate. Instead of like it being made of chocolate, we think of it as the flavor is chocolate. So you can have like the same ice cream, one is chocolate flavor, one is vanilla flavor, one is strawberry flavor. And it's not made of chocolate, made of vanilla, made of strawberries. It's just that's the flavor. Maybe there's chocolate in it, maybe there's vanilla in it, maybe there's strawberries in it. But we don't think of it as being made of that thing. So that might be a little bit of a difference between English and Spanish, and why the de que is the structure in Spanish versus in English. So again, we would just say, what kind of ice cream is it? That's how we would ask that question. Assuming that's what you're trying to ask, and we just don't have a good translation. Maybe you're asking something slightly different, and I just don't know the best way to translate that. That's possible too. Okay. Yeah, hey everyone. Yeah, welcome back, David. Welcome back. What's the pizza? It's pepperoni. 2 P's. P-E-P-P. Pepperoni. Pretty sure it's 2 P's and 1 R. Yeah. Anyway, it's pepperoni. Did I get that then right? I think that. Did I get that right? What's the pizza? It's pepperoni. You could say that. You could say, what's the pizza? You say, what kind of pizza is it? That's a little bit of a longer. But if you just say, yeah, what's the pizza? That sounds a little short, a little informal if you phrase it that way, but it does work just fine. There's no problem with that. It's also very common to say, like, what's on the pizza? And then you would just say pepperoni instead of it's pepperoni. But yeah, what's the pizza? It's pepperoni. That works. No problem. What is the difference between a vowel and more open back-rounded o vowel in American English? Not caught merger. I can't hear the difference. Back-rounded o vowel. So you mean like between a and o? Because if it's not the caught merger, then it has to be a and o, which that I don't see why there would be a problem there, because the lips are very different. O. Can you reformulate that? Are you sure it's not the caught merger? Try to. I don't know if you can point me to. You can't share a link, but if you have like a resource online that I can look up really quick to see what you're specifically talking about, that would probably help. Thank you for the warm welcome. In fact, you could use the IPA symbols if you want. I don't care too much for the IPA, but I can work with them. There is a use for them. So that would probably be the easiest way to do that. Josh really wants to go to the beach. He's using that sentence, dating all live English accent session. Yeah, I know, and I don't. I really don't. I live next to the beach. I'm like, what is this, 10th? I'm 10 blocks, about 10 blocks away from the beach, and I never go because I don't want to. I think it's because I'm a San Diego native. It's just it's built into my subconscious, apparently. Well, it sounds like the posture of the sounds and information are more than enough. Okay, yeah, for sure. Which the when I say posture, there's the core posture. I'm implying building the sounds into the posture, but at the very least, try to get the core posture and then move around it when you're making the sounds. It doesn't have to be pinpointed. As I said, there's ranges to things and this and that, but if your goal is to sound as close to a native as possible, I think mouth posture is like the most efficient, assured way to do that. And I can't say assured 100% because I haven't reached the end of the course yet. But so far, things look really, really good. Where if you're just shadowing, like maybe you sound really, really good, your stress is good, your intonation is good, your sounds, like maybe if you can do eh perfectly, you can do e perfectly. But then when you're speaking, maybe there's something just a little bit off. It could be that little bit of posture that maybe the sounds are kind of floating a little bit, or your transitions are a little bit off. So if you build the posture into the process, it helps to make sure that everything's anchored properly in a step-by-step way, so that you don't have that problem. But I know how the posture is important. I left you a comment under your video on it, but it got deleted as well. Interesting. Maybe it's held for review. Yes, it's held for review. YouTube doesn't notify me of comments that are held for review for some stupid reason. So So I now see that link. Yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't hang around here. As for the fourth paragraph, I found all the info about it here. A very quick explanation on 127. Okay. So I don't think I have time to go over this right now. I want to at least make sure that I finish up the chat here. And then if I have a minute, I'll take a look at that. But otherwise, I can get back to that later. I'll approve the comment and whatnot. Yeah, if you guys post something and you don't get some sort of interaction from me, it could be that I just didn't interact on it, because some people leave like random comments and stuff that I'm just like, well, I don't really want to heart that, but I don't want to, like, there's no reason to delete it. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Usually I just heart things. But there's a good chance if you're asking me a direct question, not just commenting, and I don't respond, it's very, very likely that it went into the held for review section and YouTube doesn't tell me about it. I have to periodically check that to see. So just so you know. Okay, so I wrote that there once I started sounding with a very strong South American accent with no reason, and then like an old American actor, James Stewart. It was kind of impossible to mix it up with anything else. The thing was only about some very little sub sounds. All my sounds got at the point. I guess that was the posture, but I lost both of them anyway later. Okay. Yeah, so that'll probably make more sense when I look at what you referenced. But it sounds like evidence for mouth posture. So that's okay. If you lose things, you can always bring them back. But one of the interesting things is when you build up something like some knowledge or skill, and then you forget about it because it never, for whatever reason, it didn't get stabilized in your brain. You did sort of build a bit of a pathway, and neurophysicists might disagree with me to some extent on this. I'm not a neurophysicist. Yeah, I'm a neuroscientist, neurophysics. That's a new field, I think. Neuroscientists might disagree with me a bit, but I do know that, say if you practice learning something and then you kind of like it fades away, or you don't do it for a while or whatever, and like when you come back to it, it tends to be easier to rebuild it. Because your brain has sort of already been exposed to it, unless maybe it's been like decades or something since you've like done anything with that and it was very weak to begin with, then you might be back to zero. But usually there's this sort of, you can get back into that groove a little bit and it'll be easier. So all is not lost. That's fine. People don't understand me even in my native language. Okay. To an extent, I feel like English speakers understand me more. Maybe after years of barely speaking to then learning English messed up my native language. I mean, I don't think you'll ever really completely lose your native language. You'd have to do some crazy things for that to happen. But I mean, use it or lose it, right? At the end of the day, it is muscle. If you do nothing but that, like, or nothing, if you do nothing but speak a foreign language, right? Like you completely ignore your native language, you don't listen to it, you don't read it, you never like you change, you're able to think in English instead of your native language or whatever it is. Given enough time, theoretically, you will probably lose your native language. I think there have actually been some cases of that, but I think those are usually cases where like they were still young, maybe not super young, but they're still children, and then like they moved to another country and weren't able to use their native language anymore. They had to learn a new language and they never used their native language, and they can kind of maybe remember some words or bits and pieces, but it's like that's not their language anymore, even though that's what they started speaking when they were young. So there are cases like that, but if you made it to adulthood speaking your language, it's going to be really hard to get rid of it, I think. Can English interfere on a short-term basis? Probably. If you get back into speaking your language and like, which I don't recommend this, I'm not saying to do this, but like, let's say if you ignored English for like a year and you just spoke your native language and interacted with a lot of people, it would probably improve, at least back to, I'm sure you're saying now people don't understand you, but I'm sure at some point they did, right? I would hope so. So I don't know. Sometimes weird things happen with languages. Everybody's a little bit different too, so I don't really know. Thank you for fun live. You're welcome. Make sure to go to the beach. No, I will not. Say hi to his Stupidity Delivery Services niece. Okay, good. And then the last thing here, 155. I have to go here in a few minutes. Fernando asks, does the E sound always sound like A? So I think you mean the E sound, which I would transcribe as EH. Again, if you just put E, I don't know if you're talking about this one or that one. So either use the IPA symbol, which I don't prefer, or use something that makes it clear. There's a reason why we use the two E's or the E and the silent H to help distinguish between them. Makes it very, very clear. But anyway, does the E sound always sound like A? As you mentioned in that chocolate word, also I've heard it in Kamehameha, who pronounces it like Kame. Yeah. Does S sound? So does the S sound always sound like A? Okay, no. So English has like in bed. And then we have A, and the start of that diphthong, the first sound, right? I'm writing it with the letter E. That's how we would try to transcribe it phonetically within English itself. But the sound is not the same sound. Okay, the end point is I. Sounds kind of like E, but the end point is I. But the start of the A diphthong is not E. Okay, like in bed. If I were to, it's hard for me to isolate it, but if I were to use that, see, bed, day, bed, 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 that immediately gives me an accent. If I just use the start of A in bed, it gives me an accent. So you can't do that. Now, if you were to accidentally, we were kind of talking a bit about this earlier, if you maybe are exaggerating and you accidentally put into the start of A, it can work, but I wouldn't recommend that. That's probably going to sound weird. So there's two different sounds here. What Spanish has, this is probably the root of your question, the sound that Spanish has is the same sound. It's a slightly different quality because the different mouth posture between Spanish and American English, but it's the same IPA symbol. It is close enough to not be a different sound. I even hear it myself. It's the same sound. The start of A in English is the same sound as the sound in Spanish, just the single sound. Okay, that sound in American English only exists in the diphthong A. We only use it in the diphthong A. We don't use it as an individual sound like you do in Spanish. The individual sound we have, unless we cut the diphthong, right? We can cut the diphthong. Instead of saying day, we say day. It's still supposed to be a diphthong. In American English, the individual sound we have is the like in bed. Now, and are very, very similar, close sounding sounds, but they are different sounds. Okay. And that's probably where the confusion comes from. So try to focus on training your ears to hear the difference between the Spanish and the English which I probably didn't do the Spanish there perfectly because I have American posture still, but you get the point. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah. And then for Stupidity Delivery Service, I'll have to take a look at your link. If it's sufficient, I will just comment on it. But if I have to talk about it in a live stream again, I will. So thank you guys very much. I do have to go at this point. And it was a really great live stream, very productive. Hopefully I was able to answer some questions, correct some misunderstandings. And yeah, look forward to the Rising Intonation Part 1 lesson, which if all goes well, I will be able to finally finish today. It's 2 days late from where I wanted it. Should be possible. I'm pretty sure I can get it done tonight. So maybe that's why I struggle with saying things like gaming. I used yeah, you don't want to do that. It's not gaming. That's not right. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So look forward to that. Thank you guys, and I will see you next week.